The Boeing 777 had been airborne for 3 hours when Captain Marcus Hendrickson felt the first tremor in his left arm. His co-pilot, Timothy Walsh, was in the galley stretching his legs, chatting with the flight attendants about their upcoming layover in Seoul. The autopilot hummed its steady electronic prayer, keeping them level at 37,000 feet over the Pacific. Marcus tried to flex his fingers around the throttle, but they wouldn't respond. The tremor became a spasm, then his vision tunneled, darkness creeping from the edges like ink spreading through water. In the back of the plane, in seat 42F, a man slept. His clothes were threadbare, layered despite the cabin's regulated temperature. His beard was unkempt, silvered with age and neglect, and his weathered hands clutched a faded military jacket to his chest like a child's blanket. The other passengers had noticed him boarding, their expressions a mixture of discomfort and pity. A homeless man on an international flight was unusual enough to draw stares, to spark whispered conversations. No one knew that a church charity had bought his ticket, that he was flying to see a daughter he hadn't spoken to in 7 years. No one knew his name was Gabriel Reeves, or that he'd once been a colonel in the Air Force. Timothy Walsh returned to the cockpit to find Marcus slumped forward, unresponsive, his face gray. Timothy's training kicked in immediately. He secured the captain, checked vitals, grabbed the radio. "Mayday, mayday, mayday. United 2947, we have a medical emergency. Captain is incapacitated, requesting immediate assistance." His voice was steady, but his hands shook as he scanned the instruments. He had 800 hours of flight time. He'd never landed a 777 alone, especially not one carrying 312 souls across an ocean with the nearest diversion airport 400 miles away. The senior flight attendant, Jessica Tam, appeared in the doorway. "What do you need?" "Get on the PA. Ask if there are any pilots on board, commercial, military, anyone." Timothy's eyes never left the instruments. The plane was stable, but weather was building ahead. A storm system that would require manual navigation, delicate hands, experience he didn't have. Jessica's voice came through the speakers, professional but urgent. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a medical situation in the cockpit. If there are any certified pilots on board, please identify yourself to the flight attendants immediately." In seat 42F, Gabriel Reeves opened his eyes. The cabin was a study in controlled panic. Passengers twisted in their seats, looking around, hoping someone would save them. Gabriel sat motionless, his calloused hands still gripping the old jacket. The fabric was olive green, worn soft by decades. On the breast was a patch, faded but still visible, a falcon with wings spread, clutching lightning bolts. The insignia of the 421st Fighter Squadron. Beneath it, a name tape read REEVES. Jessica Tam moved through the aisles, her eyes scanning faces. She'd been flying for 12 years, had handled emergencies before, but this was different. The PA system crackled again. Timothy's voice. "We need someone now. Anyone with flight experience, we need you in the cockpit." There was something in his tone that made people sit straighter, made the reality of their situation crystallize. Gabriel looked down at the jacket in his hands. He'd been 23 when they'd given it to him, fresh from flight school, cocky and invincible. He'd worn it through 2 deployments, through missions he still couldn't talk about, through the day they'd pinned eagles on his shoulders. He'd been wearing it the day everything fell apart. The day his drinking finally cost him his wings, his career, his family. That had been 4 years ago. 4 years of shelters and street corners, of watching other people's lives continue while his remained frozen in amber. A flight attendant passed his row, her eyes sweeping over him without recognition. He was invisible, just another problem passenger. Gabriel had become accustomed to being invisible. It was easier than being seen, easier than explaining what he'd lost. His daughter, Sophia, didn't know he was coming. The church group had reached out to her, had arranged everything. Gabriel wasn't sure she'd even see him when he arrived, wasn't sure he deserved it. The plane hit turbulence, a sudden jolt that sent unsecured items tumbling. A child started crying. Gabriel's hands tightened on the jacket, muscle memory making his fingers trace the patch. 23,000 flight hours, 7 different aircraft types, 214 carrier landings, 3 emergency situations where he'd been the only thing between his crew and disaster. The numbers floated through his mind, unwanted and unavoidable. Jessica Tam was 3 rows behind him now, her professionalism cracking at the edges. "Please," she was saying to a businessman, "any experience at all?" The man shook his head, his face pale. "I took lessons once, maybe 10 hours, that was 20 years ago." Timothy's voice came through again, tighter now. "We have weather ahead, I need help. If anyone has any flight experience, please." Gabriel closed his eyes. He could see Sophia's face the last time they'd spoken, her tears, her anger, the way she'd told him she couldn't watch him destroy himself anymore. He'd promised to stop drinking, promised to get help. He'd broken that promise within hours. 4 years of broken promises, 4 years of letting everyone down. Why would this be different? Because 312 people are going to die if you don't move. The thought came unbidden, in a voice that sounded like his old squadron commander. Gabriel had spent 4 years running from responsibility, from the weight of his failures. But some part of him, the part that had earned those eagles, had led men and women into combat, had made split-second decisions that saved lives. That part never really went away. It just went quiet, waiting. Gabriel Reeves stood up. His legs were unsteady, his body worn from years of poor nutrition and worse choices. But he stood. Every person in nearby rows turned to look at him, and he saw their expressions change from hope to confusion to something close to disdain. A homeless man in ragged clothes, smelling of yesterday's streets, was not what they'd been praying for. "I can fly this plane," Gabriel said. His voice was rough, underused, but it carried authority. Years of command don't disappear completely, even when everything else does. Jessica Tam appeared at his side, her eyes taking in his appearance, her face carefully neutral. "Sir, do you have pilot certification?" Gabriel reached into his pocket and pulled out a battered wallet. Inside, laminated but yellowed, was his military ID. The photo showed a different man, clean-shaven, clear-eyed, wearing a dress uniform with eagles gleaming on his shoulders. Colonel Gabriel Reeves, United States Air Force. The ID had expired 3 years ago, but it was real. Everything it represented had been real once. Jessica's eyes widened. She grabbed her radio. "Timothy, I have someone. He says he's a pilot, military, he's coming up." She paused, looking at Gabriel with new eyes, trying to reconcile the man before her with the rank on the card. "Sir, follow me, quickly." They moved through the cabin, Gabriel's worn shoes silent on the carpet. Passengers watched him pass, their faces showing doubt, fear, desperate hope. He heard whispers. "That's who they found." "Are you kidding me? We're going to die." Gabriel had heard worse, had said worse to himself in the dark hours when the bottle was empty and the truth came flooding in. The cockpit door opened and Timothy Walsh turned. His face went through the same journey as everyone else's, hope, confusion, barely concealed horror. Gabriel could read it all. The first officer was 30, maybe 35, still believed in the system, in the rules. He saw a homeless drunk and wondered if this was some kind of cruel joke. Gabriel didn't blame him. "I'm Colonel Gabriel Reeves," Gabriel said, his voice steadier now. "Retired, 23,000 hours, mostly fighters and heavies. I can help you land this aircraft." Timothy's eyes flicked to Captain Hendrickson, still slumped and unresponsive. The plane shuddered again, the weather system ahead looming on the radar like a malevolent wall. He made the calculation every pilot learns to make: pride versus survival. It took him less than 3 seconds. "Sit down," Timothy said, gesturing to the captain's seat. Gabriel moved forward, his hands already reaching for the controls before he consciously decided to touch them. The moment his fingers wrapped around the yoke, something shifted in his chest. The Boeing 777 was different from anything he'd flown in the military, more computer than aircraft, but the fundamentals were the same. Physics didn't change. Gravity didn't negotiate. The cockpit smelled like coffee and electronics and fear, and it was the first place in 4 years that Gabriel had felt like he belonged. "What's our situation?" Gabriel asked, his eyes scanning the instrument panel. The muscle memory was there, buried under years of rust, but there. Timothy's voice was professional now, choosing to trust. Captain collapsed, possible stroke. 312 passengers, crew of 14. We're 400 miles from the nearest suitable airport. There's a storm system building ahead. We need to navigate through it or around it, and I need someone who can land this if something happens to me. Gabriel nodded, his hands already making minute adjustments to their heading, feeling the aircraft respond. "You've done good work keeping her steady. What's your experience with the 777? 800 hours total. This is my second year on type." "Then you're going to land this plane," Gabriel said. "I'm here to help, not take over. You know this aircraft better than I do." Something in Timothy's face relaxed. The dynamic shifted from desperate substitution to collaboration. They were a crew now, even if one of them smelled like the street and looked like he'd crawled out of a nightmare. Timothy pulled up weather data on the display. The storm ahead was massive, cells building to 40,000 feet. "We can't go over it," Gabriel said, studying the patterns. "And we can't go around, not with our fuel. We'll have to thread through. There." His finger traced a path through the system, following gaps in the cell structure. "That's threading a needle," Timothy said, but there was respect in his voice now. "I've threaded smaller ones," Gabriel replied. It was true. Over Afghanistan, over Iraq, through conditions that would ground civilian traffic without question. His hands remembered, even if his body was failing. Behind them, Jessica appeared with coffee and water. Gabriel's hands shook slightly as he reached for the water bottle. Dehydration from years of alcohol abuse, malnutrition from inconsistent meals. His body was a betrayal, but his mind was clearing, adrenaline burning through the fog. "Colonel," Timothy said quietly, "when was the last time you flew?" Gabriel met his eyes. 4 years, 2 months, 16 days. The precision of his answer spoke volumes. Timothy nodded slowly. "What happened?" "I lost everything that mattered," Gabriel said, "and I stopped fighting to get it back." The plane shuddered again, harder this time. The storm was minutes away. Gabriel's hands moved across the controls, checking systems, preparing. This wasn't redemption. He wasn't naive enough to think one good act could erase 4 years of failure, could undo the pain he'd caused his daughter, could restore what he'd thrown away. But 312 people didn't deserve to die because he'd given up on himself. That simple arithmetic was enough. "United 2947, this is San Francisco Center," a voice came through the radio. "We have your mayday. Confirm your status." Timothy keyed the microphone. "San Francisco Center, United 2947. Captain incapacitated, first officer at the controls. We have acquired assistance from a passenger with military flight experience, requesting priority handling and medical standing by." "Copy, 2947. Can you confirm the qualifications of your assisting passenger?" Gabriel took the microphone. Years dropped away from his voice. "San Francisco Center, this is Colonel Gabriel Reeves, U.S. Air Force retired. 23,000 hours, current on emergency procedures. I'm qualified to assist." He didn't mention that his last flight had ended with a board of inquiry, that his retirement had been anything but voluntary. There was a pause on the other end. Then, "Copy, Colonel Reeves, welcome back, we're here to help." Welcome back. 2 words that hit harder than Gabriel expected. He blinked against sudden moisture in his eyes, blamed it on dehydration. The first edge of the storm hit them like a fist. The plane dropped, then rose, passengers screaming in the cabin behind them. Gabriel's hands moved without conscious thought, adjusting pitch, coordinating with Timothy to maintain their chosen path through the weather. It was like riding a wave, feeling the aircraft's responses, anticipating the next surge. "You've done this before," Timothy said, no longer a question. "Different planes, same sky." Gabriel's concentration was absolute now, the rest of the world falling away. There was only the aircraft, the weather, the mathematics of survival. His hands had stopped shaking. 4 years of rust was burning away with every second, leaving behind the pilot he'd been, the commander who'd brought his people home. The storm intensified. Lightning flashed around them, close enough that the instruments flickered. Gabriel called out adjustments, Timothy executed them, and together they danced the 777 through conditions that would terrify most pilots. In the cabin, Jessica and her crew worked to keep passengers calm, to secure loose items, to prepare for the worst while projecting confidence. This was aviation at its most fundamental, skill and luck wrestling with physics and chance. "We're through the worst," Gabriel said finally. On the radar, clear air opened ahead. Behind them, the storm raged, but they'd found the path. "You did good work." Timothy exhaled, his shoulders dropping an inch. "We did good work. Colonel, I don't know what happened to you, but whoever you were 4 years ago is still in there." Gabriel didn't answer. He was looking at the horizon, at the clear sky ahead, and thinking about his daughter, about whether she'd even recognize him when he walked off this plane, whether she'd want to. The landing was 2 hours away. 2 hours of straight and level flight, of preparing for the approach, of Timothy proving he could handle the touchdown with Gabriel backing him up. 2 hours for Gabriel to remember what it felt like to be useful, to be needed, to be something other than invisible. In the cabin, passengers were beginning to relax, to process what had happened. Word had spread about the homeless man in the cockpit, about the military ID, about the impossible navigation through the storm. The narrative was changing, whispers transforming from doubt to amazement. Jessica Tam moved through the aisles, and when she passed row 42, she picked up the faded flight jacket Gabriel had left behind. She held it carefully, seeing it with new eyes, the patches, the insignia, the name tape. Evidence of a different life. "United 2947, begin your descent," San Francisco Center said. "We have emergency equipment standing by." Timothy looked at Gabriel, ready. Gabriel's hands found the controls. "Let's bring them home." The descent was textbook perfect, the kind of approach that flight schools use in training videos. Gabriel called out numbers, Timothy flew the aircraft, and together they guided 312 souls through the sky toward solid ground. The runway lights appeared through the haze, a constellation of safety, and Timothy's hands were steady on the yoke. The wheels touched with barely a shudder. Spoilers deployed, thrust reversers engaged, and the Boeing 777 decelerated along the centerline like it was on rails. In the cabin, applause erupted, relief and joy and exhaustion pouring out in sound. Timothy set the parking brake and slumped back in his seat, his hands shaking now that it was over. Gabriel unbuckled slowly. His body ached, exhaustion crashing over him like a wave. 4 years of living on the street had taken its toll, and the adrenaline was fatting, leaving pain and fatigue in its wake. But Captain Hendrickson was breathing, passengers were safe, and the aircraft sat intact on the tarmac. It was enough. Emergency vehicles surrounded the plane, their lights painting the cockpit red and white. Paramedics boarded, moving immediately to the captain. Jessica Tam appeared with Gabriel's jacket, holding it out to him like a sacred object. "Colonel," she said softly, "thank you, you saved us." Gabriel took the jacket, felt its familiar weight. "I just helped. Timothy did the hard work." It was true and important. He hadn't saved anyone alone. That wasn't how it worked. Ground crew opened the doors and passengers began to deplane. Gabriel stayed in the cockpit, letting others exit first, watching through the window as they descended the stairs into the terminal. Safe. Home. Whatever he'd lost, whatever he'd destroyed, he'd helped preserve this. It was a small thing in the grand scheme of his failures, but it was something. Timothy stood, offered his hand. "Colonel Reeves, I hope you find whatever you're looking for." He meant Sophia, though he didn't know her name. The young pilot had good instincts. "So do I," Gabriel said, shaking his hand. The terminal was chaos. News crews had already gathered, drawn by the emergency landing, the drama of the medical crisis. Gabriel tried to slip past to avoid attention, but passengers recognized him. They wanted to thank him, to shake his hand, to take pictures. He accepted it with quiet grace, but each interaction felt like sandpaper against his soul. He wasn't a hero. Heroes didn't abandon their families, didn't crawl into bottles and disappear for years. Airport security appeared, professional but firm. "Colonel Reeves, we need to debrief you. FAA requirements." Gabriel nodded. He'd expected this. The interview room was small and clinical, and the investigator was thorough but respectful. Gabriel answered every question honestly. Yes, his certification had lapsed. Yes, his last flight had been 4 years ago. No, he hadn't been drinking. The investigator made notes, said the report would take weeks to complete, thanked him for his cooperation. When they finally let him go, it was evening. The terminal had cleared, most passengers long since departed. Gabriel made his way to the exit, his jacket folded over his arm, and wondered if he should even try to find Sophia. Maybe it was better to let her think he'd never arrived. Spare her the disappointment of what he'd become. "Dad." The voice froze him in place. Gabriel turned slowly. Sophia stood 20 feet away, her face pale, her eyes wide. She was 27 now, a woman grown, but he could still see the little girl who used to wait for him at the door when he came home from deployments. She wore a nurse's scrubs, must have come straight from work. Someone had called her, told her about the emergency landing, about the homeless pilot. "I didn't know if you'd come," Gabriel said, his voice cracking. Sophia took a step closer, then another. Her eyes were wet, her hands trembling. "I saw the news. They said a homeless man landed a plane, showed your picture. I thought—" She stopped, swallowed. "I thought maybe you were dead. I've thought that a lot over the years." "I'm sorry." The words were inadequate, meaningless against the weight of 4 years of absence. "I'm so sorry, Sophia." She closed the distance between them, and Gabriel braced himself for anger, for rejection. Instead, she wrapped her arms around him, held him tight despite the smell, despite everything. Her shoulders shook with sobs, and Gabriel's careful control shattered. He held his daughter and cried, 4 years of pain pouring out in the sterile terminal corridor. "You came back," Sophia whispered against his chest. "You actually came back." "I'm trying to," Gabriel said. "I don't know if I can fix what I broke, but I want to try." They stood there for a long time, two people trying to bridge a chasm of hurt and time. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. It wasn't redemption. But it was a beginning, and sometimes that's all anyone gets. A chance to start again, to prove that the person you were is still somewhere inside, waiting to be remembered. Outside, aircraft climbed into the evening sky, their lights blinking against the gathering dark. Gabriel watched them through the terminal windows and felt something shift in his chest. He'd helped bring one of them home today. Tomorrow, he'd try to bring himself home. One day at a time, one choice at a time, one moment of not giving up at a time. It was all he had, but standing there with his daughter's arms around him, it felt like enough. The story of Flight 2947 would make the news, would become an internet sensation, a feel-good tale of redemption and heroism. But for Gabriel Reeves, standing in that terminal with his daughter, the real story was simpler and harder. It was about a man who'd lost everything, learning that everything might not be lost. It was about the fact that you can fall further than you ever imagined and still find something to catch you, even if it's just the memory of who you used to be. The sky outside was darkening, stars beginning to appear. Gabriel had spent 4 years looking down, watching his feet, afraid to lift his eyes. Tonight he looked up, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, he felt something that might have been hope. It was fragile, uncertain, but it was there. And sometimes hope is enough to land by.